and me and a girlfriend broke up, and then that was the impetus where I really decided to change my life, quit my job, and we can get into it. But that was the moment where I was like, F this, like I'm never gonna put myself in a situation where I'm depressed, lost, or have my value predicated on somebody else controlling, or a girlfriend who broke my heart at that time. So that was when I changed my life.
You consider that like a defining moment in your life?
100%, brother. Yeah. I was always, I'll be honest, I was a little bit of a little bit of a playboy always, my whole life. But then when I met her, I just like, I'm sure we've all have different stories of it where you find the girl, you give her your heart, you're honest, you're loyal, you talk about marriage. Like I gave her my whole everything. And as fate would have it, one day she called me out of the blue, cold turkey, and just wanted to end it. No explanation, no reason. I'm sure we've all had, many people can relate to stories like that. Yeah. And I was just devastated. And no amount of money or pursuing things meant anything. I was just so depressed by it for weeks. And then I ended up hiring a life coach. And that was the defining moment that just everything changed.
Amazing, amazing. And now let's talk about your podcast. I mean,
sure.
At what point did you transition from, and saying, because, I mean, you're talking about a complete shift here, right?
Radical shift.
I mean, you're going from, working for someone in sales, whatever, and then all of a sudden it's like, where did you get the idea that starting a podcast would be a good idea?
Yeah. So it actually was iterative. What I mean by that was when I was working at Tesla, I'm meeting all sorts of amazing men and women, right? Especially at that time, Tesla just came out. The types of clientele that were coming in to buy them were very refined and distinct. I know we were talking about earlier about a situation where that wasn't so much the case.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, I met Bill Clinton's Air Force One pilot. He came and bought a Tesla from me, and we're sitting on test drives, and I'm just learning from all these CEOs and executives how they started, what they do. Ballparks of the scale of their business.
Sure.
And all of them were always like, dude, you're such a great salesperson. You're such a great that you should start your own thing. You're so good. Come work for me. So that would happen constantly. So that built my confidence, A. And then B, remember I told you earlier about knocking on doors and solar in the hot heat. That built my internal resilience to be unafraid to knock on doors, right? Whether it was a multi-million-dollar mansion and I'm like sitting there with a dry throat like, oh my God, I hope they don't, So now fast forward later, when I would meet all these big names, my confidence was building with high-level people. You learn the nuance that, they look at the watch, they look at the shoes, they look at how you talk. So you learn how to talk to higher-level people. So I didn't know that it would lead to a podcast, but I was building all these micro skill sets and strengths. And so the podcast started because when I told this on Jordan Belfort, the Wolf of Wall Street's podcast, when he asked me about it. It was a crazy moment because he gave her a shout out. But when she broke up with me, I had never been broken up with ever in my life, right? My ego prided itself on that. So she broke up with me cold turkey. And the day she broke up with me, I was just devastated, man. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't think. I started drinking and smoking and self-sabotaging, blew all my money, went into all this debt, started slacking off at Tesla. And but I remember at her place, she had a library set, and she was obsessed with Grant Cardone. And I had never heard about Grant Cardone other than through her. And so she was learning from Grant Cardone, and she was super into health and fitness, so she loved like Quest bars. And one of her guilty pleasures was eating Hot Cheetos. Yeah. So you see where this is going, right? Yeah. So in my young maybe spiteful or inspired mind at that time, I was like, when she broke up with me, I was like, all right, you don't want my time? I didn't fight with her or anything when she broke up with me. I just accepted it, and the fire burned inside. I don't know what to do with it. Sure. But I remember my last $850, I hired a life coach. Shout out Dave Thorpe. And we did a coaching session. And in that combustion of desperation and inspiration and just motivation, whatever you want to call it, we do a coaching sesh, and he said, Omar, if life was perfect, what would happen next? Forget about all the rules, forget about where you are, just forget about all that. If life was perfect, what would happen next? And I remember when he asked me that, it blew my mind, because for the first time ever, it gave me the opportunity to open up the possibility. I think most people never take the actions because they never see the possibility. Like most people assume that the significant other or the business or the people they hire or the show or the podcast is going to be less than ideal. And so they never aim, right? I think Les Brown says most people don't aim too high and miss, they aim too low and hit. And so he's just telling me all this. I know I'm giving you a lot of context, but I'm just kind of trying to paint the picture to the audience of like how the perfect storm came together. And so, yeah, he said if life was perfect, what would happen? I just said I would inspire millions of people. I would make millions of dollars, and I would make sure that my ex-girlfriend never forgets my fucking name. And I would make sure that whatever guy she's with is a fan of my show before they ever meet. I was just so red hot. And so we wrote down a list of, he was like, well, what do you want to do? I was like, well, I love great conversations and I love meeting inspiring people. I didn't have the idea, to be honest, of a podcast. But what my coach, Dave Thorpe, again, shout out Dave, had me do is he was like, okay, let's start with what you know. You don't know what you want to do. You have vague ideas. Let's start with what you know and let it grow.
Yep.
So kind of like an ingredients list for making food. Instead of worrying about the entree, let's just take inventory of the ingredients, took a piece of paper, wrote down all these skill sets, and he was like, hey, it looks to me like you want to get paid to have great conversations and inspire people. So I was like, so does that mean I get a radio job? Right? To show you how naive I was about the podcast thing. And he's like, well, you could do YouTube. It's free, no barrier to entry. And he was like, any idea of who you want to do a video with? And I remembered the ex-girlfriend, Grant Cardone. She loved Quest bars and Hot Cheetos. So my first year doing the podcast, I got Grant Cardone. I got the billion-dollar creator of Quest Nutrition, Tom Bilyeu.
Tom, yeah.
And then I went on a mission to find the creator of Hot Cheetos, the janitor who started it, who cold called the CEO of Frito-Lay, and got in touch with him and ended up, we could get into that, but it was crazy stories of how I got in touch with them. But my first year interviewed all three of them, and they ended up getting millions of views, and we're off to the races right away. And fast forward, that Hot Cheetos, somebody saw the Hot Cheetos interview, led to a script, 20th Century Fox developing it, Eva Longoria produced and directed it, and it premiered at the White House. And I was invited to the premiere by the creator of Hot Cheetos. Yeah.
Wow.
It's a crazy story, but I was just young and I was hungry as fuck. I don't know if I can cuss on this podcast.
You sure can.
I was just so, like, the fire was so fucking hot. I was just like, she will never forget my fucking name, at that time.
Amazing.
And the motivation, obviously, like, after the first year, like, I wish her the best and everything. But at that time, I just had so much pain.
That was a fire in your gut.
100%.
Yeah. It was that's so great. And that shift, that energized you to take your life really, when you look back, to the next level, which is what so many people, and you were talking about action. Are you kidding me? That is I believe that most people that sit around talking, wishing, dreaming, those people are great. We need those people, the visionaries, but we need more of the ones that take action, right? That actually follow up, create a mission, create a purpose with intention. So, I love the fact that, you were on it, you were coached and you jumped on it, and hey, you made it happen. Because I guarantee you, getting the dude from Cheeto was probably hard as hell.
Oh, it was insane. All of them were. Grant Cardone, I got a story for you there. I don't know if you've heard it, but Grant lives in Miami. He was in LA, in Beverly Hills, and I saw on his Instagram story that they were talking about this. They rented this huge house for like $200,000 a week in the hills. Like, it was just crazy, like, epic spot. Or they were in Malibu, I think, at that time. And so on the background of his Instagram story, I heard Elena say, "Hey, babe, are we still going to dinner at blah blah blah?" It was a place in Beverly Hills, and I know the spot. But it was very faint in the background. It wasn't like the focus of the Instagram story. And in my head, I thought, like, how am I going to get these guys? And I was like, fuck it, let me ask them, right? Solar, let me just knock on their door. And so I drove in like 3.5 hours of traffic to chase them down. I saw that they were at an Equinox gym working out. I drove to the Equinox. I bought like a day pass. I went in. I tried to, and my plan was to look like I accidentally bumped into them and then ask them to be on the podcast. So I go to Equinox. They're not there. I'm like, fuck, they left. So then I'm like, dang. Then I hear about the dinner thing. So then I drove back, and then all the way back to Beverly Hills, I wait outside the restaurant, and I drive up, and at the time I had a 2013 Toyota Corolla white, like beat up, dirty, does not belong in Beverly Hills. You know what I mean? So and I couldn't afford valet at the time.
Yeah.
So I park, you park like a couple streets away, and I walk all the way down. I go to the restaurant, and I'm like, shit, I'm here. What do I do now?
Sure.
And at the time, I'm like broke, lost, depressed, just fire in my belly. That's it. And the show doesn't exist yet, by the way. So I go to the restaurant. I'm waiting outside, and I go in, and I tell the waitress like, oh, is it okay if I use the restroom? I have my party's coming shortly. And my plan is when I go to the restroom to kind of scope out the place to see if he's there.
Sure.
And sure enough, he was there. I didn't want to interrupt the dinner. I learned at Tesla about the power of being respectful. So I go outside and I just wait. And I end up waiting like 2.5 hours. Every time the door opens, somebody to leave, my heart's racing. It's not them. Door opens, my heart's racing. It's not them. So I'm going through these like mini heart attack, anxiety attacks for like 2.5 hours. You got to understand, I'm like now 6 hours into this thing. And in my head, this is so stupid. This doesn't make any sense, right? But the fire in me was just like, whatever it takes.
I love that. I love that, yes.
Whatever it takes. He finally comes out with Elena. No idea what I was going to say. And I just walk up to him. And I said, hey, excuse me, Grant. And he turns around. And he's like, hey, what's up, man? I said, hey, man, I just want to say my name's Omar. I saw you guys were in town. I just wanted to introduce myself and say thank you so much for all you do, right? And at the time, I'd listened to the 10X rule, all of his sales training, because I was in sales, right? So at that time, I was very familiar. So we start to talking, and he's with Elena. They also had quite a bit to drink, so they were pretty loose and relaxed, which I saw when they went in. That's why I waited. I was like, take as long as you want, right? So they come out. I go up to him, and I said, is it cool if I grab a photo with you and Elena? He was like, yeah, absolutely. Where are you from? So I told him, and then we start talking, and then I said, by the way, I said, I have a podcast that I'm about to launch. It's in post-production. It wasn't true at the time, but I needed an excuse for why I didn't have an audience, right? And from Grant, I learned to bring up all the objections in advance, right? Every reason he would say no to doing the podcast, I thought of while I was out there for 2.5 hours in advance. So I said, by the way, I know you guys are in town for a week, and I know you would normally never do this, and I would normally never ask, but I have a show that's in post-production that we're about to launch, and I would love to interview you on the show. If you'd be open for an hour, we'd come to you, be in and out in 30, 60 minutes, whatever you have. We'll promote the 10X book, like totally come to you, make it easy, we'll be in and out. And he looked at me, and he was like, did you really just drive 3.5 hours just to come outside the restaurant and pitch me to be on your show? And I said, yes, sir, I did. And then he just looked at me and kind of like laughed. And then I told him, I said, consider me the young man you once were with your dream. So he's like, all right, man. He's like, I like you, man. You got a business card? And you know how all of us, we all pretend we have a business card. We do the fake thing, even though we know we don't.
Yeah.
So I did that, and somehow I had one, right? I give it to him. He's like, oh, I like you. You're prepared. Long story short, he ends up connecting me with his assistant. And probably like 3-4 days later, we end up filming the podcast. And at that time, ended up being the most watched and downloaded Grant Cardone interview in the world. The first take. I don't know how to explain that, right? Tom Bilyeu DM'd him like 14 times. He never replied. And then just the 15th time, he literally was just like, yeah, sure. Here's my assistant's phone number. Here's the address. And I remember we went down to film it at 4 a.m. in Beverly Hills. Creator of Hot Cheetos. He was doing speaking events at local churches. He was on a speaking tour. I went to every stop of the speaking tour, drove hours, every single one. When he would get off stage, I introduced myself the first time, pitched him, he said no. Second time, he said no. Third time, he said no. Finally, the fourth time, I didn't even go up to him. He came up to me after. He was like, you're a persistent son of a bitch, you know that? And same thing. I said, consider me the young man you once were. He was once a janitor at Frito-Lay, never made more than $3 an hour. And he did that with the CEO. He cold called him to bring up the idea of Hot Cheetos. So I know that those guys know the seat I'm in. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Of needing that one person in a senior position to give you the opportunity. Yeah. So I always just spoke to that. That ended up being the most watched and downloaded Hot Cheetos interview ever, and it led to all these things. So, yeah, there's so many stories, but just in a nutshell,
That's amazing.
That was the
and
attitude.
just the fact that you were so driven, you were so hungry, and
Starving.
sometimes
I was starving.
right. So sometimes, I mean, people get in a position where they complain, they whine, and it's like, oh, I'm in a rut, I'm in a rut, but they don't go out there and take the action like you did.
Yeah.
And I try, I've coached up to this point right around 12,000 and something men.
Wow.
And what happens many times is that all they do is complain about the rut that they're in, and they're in the same place that they were 2, 3, 5 years ago.
Right.
And I ask one simple question. Have you gone out there and taken any kind of action? Have you networked, shook hands? Have you, exposed yourself, going out there? Do people know who you are? 99% of the time is like, yeah, no, I don't have time for that.
Yeah,
But the thing is, you went out there, you were so hungry, you drove, you put in the time, the effort, you built tremendous resiliency and tenacity. I mean, and that is part of, I guarantee you, that is part of who you are right now.
Absolutely.
It's in you. If they took away everything from you, you have the capability to step up and win at the game again.
Right. All over again. Absolutely.